Well, good afternoon, Rotarians and guests, and welcome to you all for such an important occasion on our Rotary calendar. My name is Peter Dakin, and I'm your MC, and I'll also provide the thanks and reflection today. We would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and also pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. This past week has seen some important milestones for Rotary International, including celebrating our own club's 103rd birthday on Tuesday. It is hard to believe that 3 years has passed since our inspiring collection of centenary events in 2021. It was also the birthday of our founder, Paul Harris, who was born on the 19th of April 1968 in Wisconsin, USA, and passed away on the 27th of January 1947. He was the founder and organiser of the first Rotary Club of Chicago in 1905, and it is wonderful that so many of our members and non-Rotarians have been named a Paul Harris Fellow. Our club continues to provide outstanding community service following the footsteps of some of our distinguished leaders. It is fitting on the eve of Anzac Day that we reflect on the incredible contribution of Sir John Monash, our second president in 1922-23. And each year we award the Monash Medal to an outstanding Australian who's made a significant contribution to the community. And today we acknowledge the extraordinary contribution of Thomas Baker, scientist and philanthropist, who was appointed our 9th president for 1928-29, but sadly died midway through his office. His legacy continues, as we will hear today. Please ensure your glasses are charged for the loyal toast by President Chris. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Peter. Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia and Rotary International. Thank you. Please be seated and we will reconvene at 1:15. In the meantime, please enjoy the company and the Sofitel service.
Okay.
Thank you. Members, visitors and guests, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our 37th meeting in our 103rd year and our 8th Thomas Baker Oration. Today is an important day in the club's calendar as we are honoured to have Dr. Doug Hilton, AO, CEO, CSIRO, to deliver the 2024 Thomas Baker Oration. Doug will be speaking on If Science is to Save Us, and we will more formally introduce him shortly. In the meantime, would you please acknowledge and make him welcome? We are very honoured to have returning as special guests past Thomas Baker orators, themselves distinguished science, Dr. Alan Finkel, AC, Dr. Ziggy Switkowski, AO, and also as our guests we have the trustees of the Baker Foundation, Chairman Logan Armstrong, Kate Metcalf, John Turnbull, Elizabeth Delahunty, and club members Trevor Nick and former Chairman Jerry Johnson. Would you please acknowledge and make these guests welcome? Amongst our many guests today, we have a terrific support by distinguished scientists, CEOs, academics of many of our city's leading science research facilities. We are pleased to host CEO Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute, John Greenwood. Also well represented is the CSIRO, the Burnett Institute, WeHi, Monash University's BioEyes and Institute of Medical Engineering, CSL, St Vincent's Institute of Medical Research and several pharmaceutical companies. Also here is our corporate member, the Bionics Institute. We welcome you all. Would you please join me in acknowledging and making our visitors and guests welcome. Almost done. Moving now to club notices, our upcoming club signature events. On the 29th of May, we have an artificial intelligence event with the Royal Society of Victoria. On the 24th of July, we are pleased to have Christine Holgate talk about the environment lunch, talk at our environment lunch, and the flyers are on the table. So these will be very well-attended big events for Melbourne. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the day, Professor Rob Metcalf, to come to the podium to take over today's meeting and further introduce our special guest speaker. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, President Chris. As you've already heard, this is the 8th Thomas Baker Oration for the Rotary Club of Melbourne. I'd like to also express my thanks to the two previous Thomas Baker orators, as you've already heard today, Dr. Alan Finkel, who delivered the inaugural Thomas Baker Oration back in 2016, and Ziggy Switkowski, who gave the second one in 2017. So thank you very much for both of you coming on today. I think it's very important to say a few words about Thomas Baker before I introduce today's notable speaker. Thomas Baker, a fascinating individual. I've been reading about him quite intensively over the last few days, I can assure you. He was an entrepreneur and an inventor. He migrated to Australia from the UK when he was 10 years old. He initially trained in pharmaceutical chemistry and worked as a chemist in Queensland for 5 years. During this time, Baker showed his early inventiveness and entrepreneurship by creating essentially a toothpaste, a dentifrice to clean teeth, which he named Coralline. This was one of his many commercial successes that was absolutely endemic with him at that time. He and his wife Alice moved to Melbourne, where Thomas Baker then started a degree in medicine at the University of Melbourne. However, he quit medicine after 1 year, where he decided to pursue a career in dry plate photography. That was becoming very popular at the time. He had invented his own formula and manufactured plates that were sold in the community. He formed the Austral Plate Company that became so successful that in 1908, Kodak Limited, and you remember Kodak, joined Austral to become Australian Kodak Limited. It is noteworthy that his firm produced the first X-ray film here in 1924. Thomas Baker amassed a large fortune. He was the 9th president of the Rotary Club of Melbourne, as you heard earlier on today, this afternoon, but died halfway through his tenure in 1928. He left a will that very generously supported medical research and philanthropy. This led to what is known today as the Baker Institute and the Baker Foundation, which provides further medical research funding and other charitable grants. The Thomas Baker Oration was established to showcase Australians who have demonstrated leadership and innovation in the fields of medicine, science, technology, industry, and philanthropy. The previous orators have all been leaders in their field, and today's speaker, Professor Doug Hilton, is no exception. So a few words about Doug Hilton before I invite him to the podium. Doug was the 6th director of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research from 2009 until 2023. During this time, he oversaw a new era for the Institute that embraced not only fundamental research and discovery, but also accelerated efforts around translation and commercialization, strengthening links with other health, research, philanthropic, and educational organisations. Doug has received numerous awards and accolades. I won't go through them all, and the list is very long, I assure you. But even back in 1989, you do the math on how far ago that was, he was awarded the Victorian Young Achiever of the Year Award. He also received the AO in 2016, and he was Melburnian of the Year in the year 2020. In June 2023, Doug Hilton was appointed Chief Executive Officer of CSIRO, as you've just heard, Australia's national science agency, and started his new role on September 29, 2023. We are delighted that Doug had accepted our invitation to deliver the Thomas Baker Oration. The title of Doug's oration is very curious: If Science is to Save Us. Please join me in welcoming Doug Hilton to deliver the 8th Thomas Baker Oration.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful occasion. I feel privileged to be the 2024 Baker Orator. And I want to start by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional owners of the lands on which we're dining today. And I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate those traditional owners in what is now called Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. You don't build the longest, and I would argue the richest continuous culture in the world without working together to ask profound questions about the universe around you, without seeking answers through observing the natural world and the relationship between animals, plants, place and time, without innovating and inventing and adapting and creating in an environment that we all know can be extraordinarily harsh and is at all times unpredictable and constantly changing. You don't build that culture without refining and communicating those answers in ways that transcend generations and without acting on those answers to benefit future generations. We talk a lot about impact at CSIRO, and our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have set the standard for what we should be trying to achieve. I also want to honour and celebrate Australia's philanthropic and service community. I'm genuinely in awe of the work you do and the contribution that you all make. I have nothing but the utmost respect and admiration for your commitment in seeing a need and responding with extraordinary energy and effectiveness. I want to thank in particular the Rotary Club of Melbourne for the honour and privilege of speaking today and for being able to offer my thoughts on trust in science as this year's Thomas Baker Orator. Thomas Baker, as we've heard, was a remarkable man, and of course his name lives on through the Baker Institutes and elsewhere, including at events like this. Speaking at an event in his honour draws together a number of threads for me personally. As you've heard, before CSIRO, I spent nearly 40 years at WEHI, and it's lovely to see friends of WEHI and Melbourne's medical research community here today. WEHI, the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, is another of Melbourne's wonderful medical research facilities, named in honour of another remarkable philanthropic family. The Hall and Baker families had a lot in common. Walter Hall and Thomas Baker were both born in the UK and emigrated to Australia in the middle of the 19th century. Hall in 1856, Baker in 1865. Both immigrated for opportunity and seized it. Hall taking on a Cobb & Co coach franchise and then investing in the Mount Morgan gold mine. That was an astute investment. It turned out to be the biggest gold mine in the world. Baker becoming a scientist, entrepreneur, businessman, ultimately merging his company with Kodak. Both men married incredibly strong and talented women, Eliza and Alice. Neither had children, and both gave back generously to their communities, not just establishing medical research institutes, but also contributing to many grassroots community endeavours. Both WEHI and the Baker Institute were founded by extraordinary generosity. Their flourishing over the ensuing 109 and 98 years respectively has required the ongoing support from Melbourne and wider Australian philanthropic communities. And I think at times we can get nostalgic about the glorious distant past, but perhaps the greatest privilege of my time at WEHI was to meet with and be inspired by the supporters that I met. Supporters who were every bit as visionary, caring and generous as the Hall and Baker families, and that should give us all cause for great hope. I know many of you are generous donors to the institutions you care about. Thank you. Thank you for caring, thank you for giving, and thank you for supporting important pillars of civil society. Today I want to talk about two things that I believe would have been in Thomas Baker's mind from the moment he formulated toothpaste. I'm not sure whether it's Coraline or Coraline. Those two things are trust and hope. Before I do that though, I'm conscious that while almost everybody here would have heard of CSIRO, not everybody would necessarily know what we do. So I want to take a few moments to explain. CSIRO or CSIRO, and I'm still getting used to which one staff use, is full. It's our national science agency, and it's full of smart, committed, creative people working hard to deliver benefits for the nation. And I've seen so many parallels between CSIRO and WeHi. Almost to a person, staff at both places are proud to be working for those organisations. Almost to a person, staff are deeply, reflexively and generously collaborative. Almost to a person, those who know the organisation are excited about their mission. The difference is that while WeHi was known to about 10% of the community, CSIRO is known to almost everyone. It has an organisational recognition that is enviable. In the Australian setting, it's like Qantas, except it's still beloved. Until I took over as Chief Executive, I didn't quite realise how beloved CSIRO was. And for those of you who know me, this attire is not my comfort zone. I'm happiest in a t-shirt and a hoodie, jeans or shorts, boots or runners, and a cap. And if I haven't got external engagements, that's what I wear to work. Fortunately for me, CSIRO does merchandise, or as we call it, merch, brilliantly. When I finally move on from this gig, I will never have to buy clothing again. Many work days and on the weekends, I wear my CSIRO branded clothes and it generates conversations. And I want to relay one conversation because it captures why being Chief Executive of CSIRO is not only, I think, the best job in the country, but also almost a sacred duty. So I live about an hour outside Melbourne, and a few months ago when I had a 9 a.m. radio interview at South Bank, I left the home nice and early to avoid the traffic, and I got in around 7 to prepare, get in the zone. Found myself a cafe that was just opening, and the proprietor, who was a chap in his 30s, saw my CSIRO cap, and he beamed at me. He said that in another life he would have worked for CSIRO. He'd trained as an engineer in Iran, he'd migrated, his qualifications weren't immediately recognised, and being entrepreneurial, he opened the cafe. He loved his cafe and his staff, and he wouldn't change it for the world. But then he said something that I think will stick with me forever. He said he had a 4-year-old daughter, and he wanted her to work for CSIRO when she grew up. A few weeks into my role as Chief Executive, this left me profoundly moved. It sheeted home to me the responsibility of leading Australia's national science agency. Someone wanted their 4-year-old daughter to work for the organisation that I led. So what does this beloved Australian institution do? My view is pretty simple. CSIRO exists to deliver scientific and industrial research in the national interest and to benefit the Australian community. The scientific and industrial is important because although we're free to work on any problem, we have a positive legislative requirement to work with industry. When I talk about research, it's shorthand for the entire pipeline, from breakthrough discoveries and eureka moments to development of those discoveries, prototyping and testing and refining them into something that has that positive impact. When I think about the benefits the Australian community want, they are many and they are varied. Research that improves our understanding of the environment and protection of our fragile biodiversity. Research that addresses acute global challenges like pandemics and transgenerational global challenges like climate change. Research that improves health. Research that connects with industry and helps build more resilient, diverse economy and driving productivity and sustainability in our small, medium and large companies. And often undervalued, but no less important, research that inspires hope and delivers wonder. And goodness knows, in a world riven by conflict and environmental catastrophes, we need wonder and hope more than ever, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. CSIRO has the people, the capabilities and the intention to help deliver all of these impacts for the nation, but we can't do it alone. We also need to be a generous collaborator with other players in Australia's research and innovation system. And to succeed and to deliver benefit to the Australian community, CSIRO and science more generally also needs an absolutely crucial ingredient, the trust of the community and its elected representatives. To be trusted, science can't be demure. CSIRO and science has to be out in the public arena. We need to be fearless. We need to be contributing facts and models and data to the important debates and conversations Australia is having on the key issues that will shape our future. As scientists, we must be able to communicate in a way that allows people to accept the science and debate the policy, rather than rejecting the science out of hand to justify a particular policy position. Recent criticism of science has distracted from an important truth, and one that I've seen overwhelmingly. The Australian public has confidence in science and recognises the intrinsic value of scientists. In fact, 9 in 10 Australians think science and scientists are crucial to solving Australia's biggest challenges. And importantly, 4 in 5 Australians also say they want to hear more from scientists about their work. This enormous trust in Australian science is built on the long track record science has of advancing national interests and creating benefits for our country. But not for a moment can we take any of this for granted. As we've seen in the aftermath of the terrible incidents in Sydney in the last couple of weeks, we live in an era shaped by misinformation and conspiracy theories. We live in a time where calculated efforts are made to erode public confidence in the critical pillars of civil society, including scientific organisations, independent electoral commissions, the courts, and the public service. We live in an era where undermining public confidence in civil society is the business model of some of our media and social media companies, and at least overseas, the reflexive position of some prominent and powerful politicians. This is a time where nuanced exchange of ideas is too often overshadowed by polarised narratives, a time when distrust pervades public discourse and where doubt is seen as weakness and changing your mind is seen as a broken promise. As a practicing scientist, and I still do science, this is the antithesis of my world and my life. Doubt is the lead singer of the band inside my head. Whenever I have an idea or I think of an experiment or an approach to tackle a problem, whenever I interpret data, I'm thinking, how might I have got this wrong? As a scientist, when all of the evidence points in the same direction, I'm thinking, how could this be misleading? How could I disprove this with a different experiment? And when it all looks consistent and I'm seeking to publish my findings, whether in a paper or a report, I submit the work to the review of peers, who are in reality my toughest critics, and invariably my work is improved by the changes suggested. This voice of doubt in my head only begins to quieten, to become part of the backing chorus, when other scientists have independently validated what I found. This is the R in CSIRO. This is real research. So when I'm talking with someone, whether a senator or one of my family members or a random member of the community who disagrees with scientists and says, but I've done my research, as if spending time Googling online or reading articles that come up on a social media feed is somehow the equivalent to careful years or decades of reading and experimenting and formulating and testing and retesting hypotheses and doubting, I call bullshit. And I hope you will join me in doing that whenever you see it happen. We can have faith in science not because scientists are smarter or have gone to a G of 8 or Ivy League university or are less subject to human frailties, but because of the processes that underpin science. And in an era like this, it's critical we do everything possible to protect trust in science. For to navigate the profound challenges that confront us, the community must have faith in scientific evidence, high-quality information and advice. We've seen this quite strikingly in the US, where there's been a continued decline in public trust in scientists in recent years, and where the share of Americans who say science has had a positive effect on society has fallen precipitously and continues to fall. And a recent example of this in play is in Florida, which has been tackling a measles outbreak. Disturbingly, the state's Surgeon General is a vaccine sceptic, has ignored and indeed decried patently uncontroversial and sensible public health practices that could mitigate the problem, and this has cost lives. Subsequent exchanges about the issue on social media include many troubling and often patently false anti-science conspiracy theories and are utterly corrosive. Those voices supporting the evidence-based, medically prudent course of action are lost in the sadly all too familiar and increasingly mainstream counterclaim world, which throws up theories like the earth is flat, 5G networks cause COVID, and billionaires are microchipping humans. If that continues, then with it goes many of our reasons for hope and optimism. Science can be extremely complex, but the fundamentals are simple. The scientific processes depend on open and transparent discussion of data, careful observations, models, methods, and conclusions. And that means scientific debate, internal within the minds of scientists, with close collaborators and with peers internationally. That debate is central to scientific progress. In contrast to debate, distortion, disparagement, and dog whistle rejection of the scientific processes or the science or a scientific organisation to justify a particular policy position rather than discussing the merits of the policies themselves begins the race to the bottom. There's a very important difference between debating the merits of a policy direction based on established facts and seeking to undermine those facts to suit a particular position. As scientists and as rational actors in our community, we cannot cede the field. We must demand our policymakers debate the policy without denigrating the science and corroding the public's trust in science generally. And when that happens, it must be seen as a red line and it must be called out. I see that as a central part of my job. I hope that every one of you see that as an important principle in your life. Not necessarily on the front pages of newspapers or on radio or in social media, but in the quiet but crucial conversations of your daily lives. I ask that all of you please stand up and be counted. I want to finish my remarks today by coming back to the often undervalued but critically important ideas of hope and wonder. For me, as a 19-year-old, finding and then working with people whose goal was to understand blood cell formation was like falling in love. And I still get a tingle up and down my spine and my fingers from remembering that moment. I experienced that again a decade or two later when I wandered into the Australian National Insect Collection and was shepherded into the amazing worlds of entomology and taxonomy and systematics. Science for me has been an extraordinary journey, one that growing up I never expected to find. An ever-evolving blend of interest and obsession and intense passion. Science for me is the community in which I never have to explain or apologise for myself, where I'm accepted and where I fit. It's been an incredible gift, way beyond anything that I could have conceived. Science matters to me, but it also matters more broadly because we find ourselves standing together as scientists, as a community, and as a nation at a crossroad. As we look back, we can see hundreds of millions of years of tectonic, climatic, and evolutionary change. That history has generated breathtakingly diverse and beautiful environments. It's shaped our unique biological diversity, and it's created environments and biological diversity not just worthy of celebration, but of documentation and discovery and understanding and protection. To have been able to travel in those landscapes looking for plants and collecting insects with family and colleagues and friends has been an incredible privilege for me personally. As we look back, we can also see the incredibly rich tapestry of Indigenous knowledge, language, art and science which come together to form the world's longest continuous culture, a culture that is also worthy of the greatest celebration. But as we look back to our more recent past, We see things that are a source of shame and alarm, and we need to acknowledge that as much as we celebrate the good. I, like Thomas Baker, arrived in Australia from Britain when I was 10. That was a little over 50 years ago. As part of a relentless 250-year stream of immigration, exploitation, dispossession, that in some respects continues to this day. That any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person or group is willing to engage with Western science, as occurs in CSIRO at the level of the board, our leadership and throughout our organisation, is to me a miracle which speaks to a profound generosity and grace. As we look to our more recent past, we can also see that Australia now has more foreign plant species than native ones. That's incredible. We see climate change as an existential crisis. We see that we've lost more mammal species to extinction than any other continent, and that the number of ecological communities listed as threatened has grown by 20% in the past 5 years, with many places literally turned to ash after catastrophic bushfires. We see right now that the Great Barrier Reef is in the grip of another mass coral bleaching event driven by global heating, the 5th in 8 years. And as we look back on the last 250 years of misunderstanding and exploitation, we see that we've transformed this environment from a place of richness and resilience to a place often frayed, frail and fragile. If we continue down the path we're on, we will surely be handing the next generation a grossly impoverished world. But as I said, we're at a crossroads. In one direction, I think will come despair, but down the other path is hope. And for a host of reasons, I'm genuinely optimistic that we can take the better path. If we look at what the community, especially younger Australians, think are the most important things, it's climate change, it's environment, it's biodiversity. Australians care, and that gives me hope. Our Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, declared recently, and I quote, "I don't accept environmental decline and extinction as inevitable. I'm not shying away from difficult problems." Our minister can see the better path, and we have a government that embraces science, and that gives me hope. We have a renaissance in citizen science through a host of platforms like iNaturalist and eBird, and renewed interest in community science through initiatives like the Bush Blitz. That gives me hope. As researchers, we now have tools and facilities which even 10 years ago we could have only dreamed, and CSIRO on behalf of the nation manages many of them. They include the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness in Geelong, our research ship, the RV Investigator, and in Canberra, a new state-of-the-art building to house the 12 million specimens of the Australian National Insect Collection, some of which go back to the exploration of the continent by Banks and others. Those biodiversity collections are an irreplaceable resource for science. They allow us to travel back through deep time and across place to understand the natural world, some of which is now lost forever. That we have this treasure trove and that we understand its significance also gives me hope. We're exploring digitisation and machine learning approaches to help make science more accessible, to make outcomes more impactful across a whole spectrum of science and research disciplines, and that gives me hope. And when I'm working at any of CSIRO's facilities on our 49 different sites or visiting research collaborators and partners, what I'm struck by is the passion, verve, determination and optimism of the incredible undergraduate, PhD and postgraduate researchers. And I met 3 students who will be in that category in a few years' time as they graduate from high school. That gives me enormous hope. What do we need to do to turn this hope into momentum to take us along a new path? I think there are a few ingredients. First, we need a high-level vision that the community and their elected representatives can understand, be inspired by, and ultimately fund. Not in a piecemeal, short-term way, but in a transgenerational manner befitting the urgency and gravity of the challenges that confront us. Every MP, senator, every parent, indeed almost every person I've met is unified in the desire for their children and their grandchildren, the next generation, to have it better than them. But what does better mean? I think we'd all agree on health. We almost all agree on the economy and the opportunities and safety nets that flow from that. We also need to agree on biodiversity and a healthy environment, and to make that a national priority. That we want our children and grandchildren to experience the same environmental richness that we have is a compelling imperative and a great rallying cry. We need a series of tractable but ambitious goals that will allow us to deliver on the vision, and CSIRO is doing a lot of thinking about that right now. But no community, no researcher, no research organisation, no matter its size, can work effectively in isolation. So we need to collaborate, including with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people whose insights, knowledge, approaches and creativity are built on 65,000 years of doing science in this continent. We need to work with researchers across the ecosystem, in other government organisations, in universities and research institutes in Australia and overseas. We need to collaborate with colleagues in state and federal government departments and agencies, and of course with members of the community. I'm genuinely optimistic that with the energy and passion of our individual scientists and their love of collaboration, with coalitions of institutions coming together, and with the trust of the community and help of everybody in this room, science can help us take the better part. Thank you again for the invitation to be here today. It's been a privilege and pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you very much, Doug. That was really an engaging presentation. I'm sure we're going to go home with a lot of things in our mind about the future, and it's great to see that CSIRO is in very good hands with Doug Hilton. I think you all agree with that. So Doug, there's no questions being an oration, but before you run away, we have a little token, a gift for you as a token of my gratitude. So
Thank you.
Please accept this. It contains a certificate, a book of the club history, and also a token gift, which happens to be Rotary socks. They're letters to be provided, but on the running sheet it says 200% Australian made. I'm trying to work out why is it 200%. It looks like being cycled twice to Australia. Anyway, thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you.
And all the best with the new goal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll pass back to President Chris.
So the club also again reiterates its thanks to our guest speaker. Your value and leadership enlivens trust from us all, and we extend our support to your stewardship of our important national treasure, the CSIRO. So once again, thank you very much. I'd like to also thank our guests for attending and encourage them to stay and keep in touch with our club. Also, thanks to members for attending, and a reminder that next week's Rotary meeting will be held upstairs at level 35. Our guest speaker will be Dr. Andrew Watt, co-head of the Australian Venom Research Unit, speaking on the snakebite partnership, saving lives across Papua New Guinea. There's no reference to our Prime Minister being there at the moment. I'm sure he'll be fine. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again.